Hark, listeners of legends, and gather close, for tonight we shall delve into the very heart of divine conflict to unravel a question as old as Olympus itself. Who truly embodies the spirit of war? Is it the brute force, the bloody frenzy, the savage roar of the battlefield? Or is it the calculated strategy, the unyielding intellect, the cold precision of the mind? We speak, of course, of the eternal clash between two of the mightiest Olympians, Ares, the embodiment of savage combat, and Athena, the goddess of strategic warfare. Forget the simple tales of gods and goddesses. Tonight we plunge into a deeper truth, a revelation of the multifaceted, often contradictory nature of conflict itself, seen through the rivalry of these two formidable deities. Their story is not just one of opposing temperaments, but a profound examination of what it truly means to wage war, and who between them truly masters its treacherous dance. Before the gilded halls of Olympus even graced the clouds, before Zeus himself sat upon his thunderous throne, the cosmos was a crucible of raw, untamed power. The elder gods, the Titans, ruled with brute force, and their very existence was often defined by clashes of strength and will. In this primordial chaos, the seeds of conflict were sown, and from these violent beginnings, one of the earliest and most visceral embodiments of warfare emerged: Ares. Ares was born of Zeus and Hera, a direct product of the stormy and often violent union of the king and queen of the gods. Unlike his brilliant sister Athena or his formidable brothers Poseidon and Hades, Ares was not born of cunning or cosmic purpose. He was born of primal, untamed emotion. His very essence was the raw, unbridled fury of the battlefield, the berserker rage that sweeps through armies, the bloodlust that drives warriors to commit unspeakable acts. From the moment he drew breath on Olympus, he was trouble, a volatile, unpredictable force that even his divine parents found difficult to manage. Zeus himself, in a moment of exasperation, once declared Ares to be the most hateful of all the gods, a sentiment echoed by many Olympians who recoiled from his indiscriminate brutality. Ares embodied war in its most elemental, destructive form. His presence on the battlefield was a harbinger of chaos. He reveled in the clang of steel, the screams of the wounded, the sight of blood staining the earth. He fought not for victory, not for justice, not for strategic gain, but for the sheer exhilaration of conflict itself. His chariot, drawn by terrifying steeds named Terror, panic and fear thundered across the plains, leaving destruction in its wake. He carried a mighty spear, a formidable shield, and a lust for violence that was insatiable. His companions were Eris, the goddess of discord, and his sons Phobos, Fear, and Deimos, Terror, shadowy figures who further sowed confusion and panic among the ranks. To Ares, war was a grand, bloody sport, a stage for his savage prowess, and he often sided with whichever army promised the most intense, prolonged, and gruesome battle, regardless of the cause or consequences. He was the patron of slaughter, the deity invoked by those who sought to unleash indiscriminate devastation. His temples, often found in less civilized, more warlike regions, were simple, stark, and sometimes stained with the remnants of blood sacrifices. His followers were the wild, the unruly, the ones who embraced the brutal honesty of the axe and the sword over the complexities of treaties or diplomacy. He was the god of the blood-soaked sword, the charging horde, the primal scream of battle. Yet even as Ares embodied this raw physical aspect of war, another fundamentally different concept of conflict was taking shape in the very mind of Zeus. This was not the chaotic frenzy of Ares, but the cool, calculated logic of strategy, the brilliance of intellect applied to the art of victory. This opposing force would manifest in the most extraordinary birth witnessed on Olympus, one that defied the very laws of nature and would forever set her apart from her brutal brother. Our story shifts now to the miraculous, improbable birth of Athena. Zeus in his early reign had taken Metis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning, as his first consort. Metis was a being of unparalleled intellect, capable of shaping the very fabric of thought. Their union was profound, but a chilling prophecy emerged from Gaia. The ancient Earth Mother Metis was destined to bear a child mightier than its father, a child who would one day overthrow Zeus himself, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus and Cronus before him. Fearful of repeating the grim cycle of patricide, Zeus, in a decisive and unsettling act, tricked Metis and swallowed her whole while she was pregnant. It was a terrifying act reminiscent of his own father's tyranny. Yet Zeus's intention was not destruction, but absorption. He believed that by consuming Metis, he would absorb her wisdom, making himself unchallengeable. However, destiny once set in motion is not so easily altered. The child within Metis continued to grow nurtured within the very mind of Zeus. Soon Zeus was afflicted by an unbearable headache, a pounding agony that no divine remedy could alleviate. The pain became so immense that it threatened to split his very skull. In desperation, he cried out for relief. Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith, guided by the desperate pleas of Zeus, or perhaps by the wise counsel of other gods like Prometheus, took up his mighty axe, a tool of creation and destruction, and struck Zeus's head with a mighty blow. From the severed skull of Zeus, not a bloody mess, but a miracle of divine birth occurred. Fully formed, fully armored, wielding a spear and a shield, and letting out a resounding war cry, Athena sprang forth. Her birth was a testament to intellect, strategy, and self-sufficiency. She was not born of passion or physical union in the traditional sense, but from the very mind of the king of the gods, imbued with the wisdom of Metis and the thunderous might of Zeus. Her emergence was a beacon of calculated power, a stark contrast to the raw, visceral birth of Ares. From the moment she appeared, Athena carried an aura of profound intellect and strategic brilliance. She was a goddess of war, yes, but her war was one of thought planning and tactical precision. She did not delight in the chaos of battle, but in the intelligent deployment of forces, the clever stratagem that secured victory with minimal loss. She fought to protect, to defend, to bring justice, never for the sheer thrill of bloodshed. Her companions were Nike, the winged goddess of victory, and sometimes even the wise owl, a symbol of her nocturnal contemplation and keen insight. Athena was the patron of heroes who fought with cunning and purpose. Her temples, often found in the heart of great cities like Athens, which bore her name, were magnificent structures dedicated to learning justice and the arts of peace as much as the arts of war. She taught mortals the crafts of civilization, weaving pottery, agriculture, shipbuilding, and the construction of fortified cities. Her wisdom was sought by kings and generals, her counsel revered by those who sought not just to fight, but to win with intelligence and foresight. She was the goddess of the shining spear, the well-planned siege, the disciplined phalanx. The very essence of their beings set Ares and Athena in direct opposition. Ares represented the destructive, senseless brutality of conflict, the primal urge to kill and maim. Athena represented the constructive, purposeful intelligence applied to warfare, the strategic mind that aimed for decisive victory and the eventual restoration of order. Ares was the raging fire consuming all in its path. Athena was the precise strike of lightning, targeting only what needed to be destroyed to achieve a greater aim. Their fundamental differences were evident even in their appearances. Ares was often depicted as wild-haired, his armor stained with blood, his eyes blazing with madness. Athena, by contrast, was always portrayed with a calm, serene countenance. Her armor polished, her helm topped with a wise owl, her gaze intelligent and piercing. She wore the aegis, a goatskin shield often bearing the head of Medusa, which could turn enemies to stone with a glance. A weapon of terror, yes, but one wielded with a calculated purpose to end conflict swiftly rather than prolong it for pleasure. Their rivalry was not merely philosophical. It often played out on the battlefields of the mortal world, as they invariably found themselves supporting opposing sides. Ares would champion the cause of violence for its own sake, spurring on the brutal and the reckless. Athena would lend her aid to those who fought with disciplined strategy and a righteous cause, even if that cause was the protection of their homes. This divine opposition mirrored the very dual nature of war itself, its capacity for utter devastation, and its necessity as a tool, however grim, for defense or justice. The Olympians themselves viewed the two very differently. While Ares was often scorned for his volatile temperament and his tendency to lose control, Athena was revered for her wisdom, her counsel, and her unwavering loyalty to Zeus. She was his favorite daughter, a trusted advisor, a goddess whose strategic brilliance often tempered his own fiery impulses. Ares, though feared, was often regarded as a crude, unsophisticated brute, while Athena commanded respect and admiration for her intellect and her measured strength. Thus, the stage was set for a divine conflict that transcended mere rivalry. It was a clash of ideologies, a battle for the very definition of warfare itself. Was war a chaotic frenzy, a primal scream, or a calculated chess match? Who truly held the reins of conflict? The brute force of Ares or the strategic mind of Athena? The answer would unfold not just on the fields of battle, but in the very shaping of human destiny, a testament to the profound and enduring struggle between these two formidable deities, each claiming to be the true master of war, each embodying a fundamental, terrifying truth about the nature of conflict in the ancient world and beyond. The seeds of opposition sown in their very births were now ready to blossom into a full-blown divine contest, a contest for the very soul of warfare. The fundamental opposition between Ares and Athena was not merely a matter of philosophical debate within the gilded halls of Olympus. It was a truth writ large in the blood and dust of countless mortal battlefields. Their very presence, their divine essences, shaped the flow of conflict, turning mere skirmishes into tests of ideology, wars into living demonstrations of their opposing principles. Ares, the embodiment of savage combat, reveled in the indiscriminate slaughter, feeding on the fear and chaos. Athena, the goddess of strategic warfare, sought not bloodshed for its own sake, but decisive victory achieved through intellect, discipline, and purpose. Their rivalry, simmering for ages, often erupted into direct intervention, turning mortal wars into proxies for their celestial dispute over the very definition of conflict. One of the most telling illustrations of their opposing natures and their direct clashes can be found woven into the epic tapestry of the Trojan War. This conflict, spurred by the abduction of Helen by Paris, was not merely a clash of human armies. It was a canvas upon which the gods painted their own rivalries, their own allegiances, and their own conflicting visions of warfare. Ares naturally aligned himself with the Trojans, the defenders of their city, primarily because their cause promised protracted, brutal, and glorious combat. He favored their wild charges, their reckless bravery, their willingness to spill blood. Athena, however, sided unequivocally with the Achaeans, the Greeks believing in the righteousness of their cause, the recovery of Helen, and the upholding of an oath, and recognizing their capacity for disciplined strategy and heroic individualism. On the dusty plains outside the colossal walls of Troy, Ares often descended cloaked in mist or appearing as a towering figure of rage, his spear blazing. He would roar encouragement to the Trojan ranks, injecting them with a berserker fury, urging them to abandon formations and engage in reckless individual duels. He reveled in the sight of chariots careening wildly, scattering the disciplined lines of the Achaeans and the frantic cries of men lost to the bloodlust he so readily inspired. He fought personally, often alongside Trojan heroes like Hector, lending his divine strength to their blows, pushing them into a frenzy of violence that often bordered on suicidal. His presence alone could turn the tide of a smaller skirmish, filling his favored warriors with unthinking courage and fearlessness, making them formidable, if chaotic, engines of destruction. He was the god of the wild charge, the sudden, devastating ambush, and the overwhelming surge of brute force. But where Ares brought chaos, Athena brought order. She would often appear to Achaean heroes disguised as a wise elder, a trusted comrade, or even in her true gleaming form, offering counsel, inspiring strategic maneuvers, and sometimes even physically deflecting blows or guiding spears. She advised Agamemnon on troop deployments, inspired Odysseus with cunning stratagems, and guided Diomedes' hand in the thickest of battles. She taught them patience, discipline, and the art of feigned retreat. She understood that true victory was not merely about brute strength, but about understanding the enemy's weaknesses, exploiting their vulnerabilities, and turning the tide through superior intellect. She was the goddess of the disciplined phalanx, the siege engine, the decisive feint, and the well-timed counterattack. One of the most famous direct confrontations between Ares and Athena occurred during the thick of the Trojan War, a moment vividly captured in Homer's Iliad. Diomedes, a mortal Achaean hero, a favorite of Athena, was battling valiantly on the plains. Ares, furious at the Achaeans' progress, descended in a rage, joining the Trojan ranks and spreading panic. As Ares engaged in a devastating charge, seemingly unstoppable, Athena appeared beside Diomedes, urging him to strike at the god himself. This was an audacious command, for no mortal could stand against an Olympian. But Athena, with her tactical genius, promised her divine aid. She literally guided Diomedes' spear, physically pushing it with her own divine hand, straight through Ares' belt, wounding the god. Ares let out a cry that was as loud as 9 or 10,000 men, shouting in battle a terrible roar that shook the very earth. He fled back to Olympus, wounded and humiliated, complaining bitterly to Zeus about Athena's interference. Zeus, though acknowledging Ares' wounds, rebuked him for his indiscriminate love of war, and his whining essentially validating Athena's strategic intervention. This single incident profoundly illustrated the core difference between the two deities. Ares, the god of brute force, was wounded and driven from the field by a mortal, albeit one guided by divine intellect. Athena, the goddess of strategy, used a mortal as her instrument, demonstrating that calculated precision could overcome raw, uncontrolled power. It was a victory not just for Diomedes, but for Athena's philosophy of warfare mind over might, strategy over savagery. The Trojan War was rife with such examples. Ares would often be seen inspiring rage and chaos among the Trojans, leading them to impulsive charges that would leave them vulnerable. Athena, by contrast, might advise Odysseus on the building of the Trojan horse, the ultimate strategic deception, which ultimately brought down the impregnable city. While Ares reveled in the bloodshed during the battle, Athena focused on the outcome of the war, seeking a decisive victory that would conclude the conflict. She saw war as a means to an end, a grim necessity for the restoration of order or the assertion of justice. Ares saw war as an end in itself, a perpetual state of glorious bloody engagement. Beyond the grand scale of the Trojan War, their contrasting influences played out in countless smaller myths and local conflicts. In myths concerning banditry or sudden violent incursions, Ares might be invoked by the perpetrators feeding their bloodlust. In tales of self-defense or the founding of a new well-ordered city, Athena would be the guiding hand, ensuring that force was used judiciously and effectively to establish peace or uphold law. She was the goddess of the phalanx, the disciplined formation of hoplites, where individual bravery was channeled into collective strength and tactical coherence. Ares, on the other hand, favored the unorganized visceral charge, the individual champion fighting purely for glory and mayhem. Their divine rivalry also extended into the very nature of human progress. Ares, being tied to the primitive raw aspects of combat, offered little in the way of civilization. His domains were the untamed lands, the places where law struggled to take root. Athena, however, as the goddess of crafts and wisdom, was intrinsically linked to the advancement of human society. She taught mortals how to smelt iron for stronger tools, and weapons how to build walls for defense, how to weave textiles, and how to cultivate olives and grain for sustenance. Her patronage extended to artisans, philosophers, and statesmen, showing that the true strength of a society, even in war, lay not just in its fighting prowess, but in its knowledge, its organization, and its capacity for creation. A city founded under Athena's watchful eye was built with strategic defenses, logical layouts, and spaces for learning and debate. A city dominated by the spirit of Ares would be perpetually at war, unstable, and prone to internal strife. Even the symbols associated with them spoke volumes. Ares' symbols were the bloody spear, the wild boar, the burning torch, all raw, untamed, and destructive. Athena's symbols were the wise owl, the olive tree representing peace and prosperity, and the shining serpent-bordered aegis shield, emblems of wisdom, foresight, and protection. Her helmet, though for battle often adorned with a sphinx or griffin, symbolized not aggression, but calculated power and guardianship. The interactions between Ares and Athena on Olympus itself were often fraught with tension. While they rarely engaged in direct physical combat among the gods, save for rare instances of divine wrestling or verbal sparring, their opposing views frequently led to arguments and animosity. Ares often mocked Athena's reliance on strategy, viewing it as cowardly or overly complicated, preferring straightforward, brutal confrontation. Athena, in turn, viewed Ares as a crude, impulsive brute, unworthy of true reverence, often chiding him for his senseless violence and his tendency to lose battles despite his immense strength. She saw him as a child throwing a tantrum while she was the adult assessing the battlefield. Their differing approaches even influenced Zeus's perception of them. While Zeus often tolerated Ares due to their familial bond and acknowledged Ares' role in inspiring raw courage, he clearly favored Athena. She was his favorite daughter, born of his own wisdom, a strategic advisor he trusted implicitly. He valued her counsel, her intellect, and her loyalty above all others. He would often listen to Athena's reasoned arguments over Ares's passionate, often ill-conceived pleas for intervention. This divine favoritism further fueled the underlying tension between the two gods, making their rivalry a perpetual subplot in the grand Olympian drama. The mortal world caught between these two powerful opposing forces became the proving ground for their ideologies. Battles were not just won or lost by human strength or skill, they were influenced by the subtle nudges of Athena's wisdom or the chaotic infusions of Ares's rage. The outcome often depended on which divine principle ultimately held sway, the disciplined mind or the unbridled fury. And as humanity progressed, building increasingly complex societies and waging increasingly sophisticated wars, the subtle intellectual influence of Athena began to demonstrate its undeniable superiority in the long run. Raw force could conquer, but only cunning and discipline could build and sustain. The brutal clashes on the battlefield were not just tests of strength, but profound examinations of the very nature of conflict, pushing towards a climax where the true essence of warfare would be revealed and one god's philosophy would stand supreme. The stage was set for the ultimate test where the fate of cities and the very definition of victory would depend on who truly understood the soul of battle, the god of bloodlust or the goddess of wisdom. The endless clash between Ares and Athena, a philosophical divide made manifest on 1,000 battlefields, propelled the cosmos towards an inevitable culmination. Their rivalry was not merely a sibling squabble. It was a profound existential debate over the very soul of warfare. Ares, the embodiment of chaotic fury, clung to the primal, visceral truth of combat, the blood, the screams, the glorious, senseless devastation. Athena, the goddess of reasoned conflict, championed the intellectual, purposeful truth, the stratagem, the discipline, the victory earned through superior thought. The stakes were nothing less than the definition of war itself, and the ultimate test of their principles would determine whose legacy truly shaped the future of human conflict. While their clashes were frequent and often dramatic, a definitive cosmic confrontation, a true climax of their rivalry, rarely occurred in a direct physical sense on Olympus itself. Such a battle would threaten the very stability of the gods. Instead, their ultimate test was often played out through their favored heroes and in the grand narratives of mortal conflict, where the outcomes would speak volumes echoing across the ages, providing the definitive answer to the question, who is the real god of war? The Trojan War, as we have seen, served as their greatest proxy battle, a sprawling canvas upon which their opposing philosophies were tested in the crucible of prolonged, agonizing conflict. Ares reveled in its bloody duration, its countless individual duels, its surges of maddening courage. He saw in every fallen warrior, every burning ship, every desperate cry, a validation of his savage domain. He empowered the brute strength of heroes, like the Trojan Hector, lending divine might to his raw power, urging him into direct, often reckless confrontation. He favored the chaotic melee where the individual warrior, driven by frenzy, could cut a swathe through the enemy ranks, scattering formations and turning order into disarray. His presence was a disruptor, an accelerant to violence, pushing men beyond their limits of sanity and into a glorious blood-soaked oblivion. Yet as the war dragged on, it became increasingly clear that raw fury alone, even divinely inspired, was insufficient for ultimate victory. The walls of Troy, built by divine hands, defied brute force. The disciplined Achaean forces, though often pushed to the brink by Trojan ferocity, continued to endure their resilience, a testament to their organization and strategic depth. This endurance, this ability to learn and adapt, was the hallmark of Athena's influence. Athena's champions, like the cunning Odysseus, embodied her principles. Odysseus, not known for overwhelming physical prowess compared to an Achilles or an Ajax, was a master of words, a weaver of deceptions, a brilliant tactician. It was Odysseus who, guided by Athena's wisdom, conceived the ultimate stratagem, the Trojan horse. This was not a weapon of direct combat, but a brilliant ruse, a calculated act of deception that bypassed Troy's impregnable defenses entirely. The vast wooden horse, presented as a peace offering, was filled with the most elite Achaean warriors. While Ares might have scoffed at such an indirect approach favoring a direct assault, Athena saw its undeniable power. It was the ultimate expression of her philosophy, winning not through more bloodshed, but through superior intellect, through a trick that ended the long, brutal siege in a single decisive stroke. The night the Trojan horse was brought within the city walls marked the true climax of the Athena-Ares rivalry in the Trojan War. While Ares might have inspired the final desperate resistance of the Trojans within their city, his influence could not withstand the strategic brilliance that had already breached their defenses. The surprise attack from within the betrayal, woven into the heart of their perceived victory, was a triumph of Athena's cunning. The fall of Troy, a city that had resisted 10 years of direct assault, came not by Ares's brute force, but by Athena's insidious ingenuity. The burning of Troy, though a scene of immense destruction and suffering that Ares would undoubtedly revel in, was the consequence of a strategic victory, not the victory itself. This pivotal event solidified Athena's claim as the superior deity of war. While Ares reveled in the chaos of any battle, Athena sought to win the war decisively and effectively. His focus was on the process of fighting, hers was on the ultimate outcome. He delighted in the bloodshed. She aimed for the strategic objective that would bring conflict to a definitive close, even if that close was violent. The ruins of Troy stood as a monument not to Ares's brute strength, but to Athena's unyielding intellect. Beyond the grand scale of the Trojan War, Athena's influence continued to manifest in ways that underscored her supremacy in the realm of strategic conflict. She was the goddess who protected and guided heroes not just in battle, but in the aftermath of war or in their perilous journeys. Odysseus, again, is her prime example. His arduous journey home from Troy, his Odyssey, was fraught with perils that demanded not strength, but cunning endurance and strategic thinking. Athena constantly advised him, guided him, and intervened to protect him, not by fighting his battles for him directly with a spear, but by whispering wisdom in his ear, cloaking him in mist, or orchestrating events in his favor. This showed that true warfare extended beyond the battlefield, encompassing survival wit and the long game of returning home and reclaiming one's rightful place. Ares, the god of the immediate fray, had no domain in such an intricate, drawn-out struggle for survival and identity. Furthermore, Athena's patronage extended to the very foundation of civilized society, something Ares had no hand in. She was the goddess of the crafts that supported sustained conflict, armor-making, shipbuilding, fortifying cities. She taught humanity the art of weaving a skill that required patience, precision, and intricate planning, mirroring her own approach to strategy. She cultivated the olive tree, a symbol of peace and prosperity, showing that her ultimate aim, even through war, was the establishment of a stable, flourishing society. Ares offered no such constructive contributions. His presence merely facilitated destruction. A civilization under Ares's full influence would be perpetually embroiled in internal strife, self-cannibalizing, unable to build or sustain. A civilization under Athena's patronage would be well-defended, intellectually vibrant, and capable of both waging war effectively and enjoying the fruits of peace. The very nature of their divine roles spoke to their differing approaches. Ares was often portrayed as a young, impetuous god prone to fits of rage, sometimes even fleeing from battle when wounded. He was the eternal adolescent of the Olympian pantheon, powerful but lacking maturity. Athena, by contrast, was born fully grown, fully armored from the head of Zeus. She was eternally wise, self-possessed, and never lost control. Her battle cry was one of calculated intent, not uncontrolled fury. She possessed the gravity and foresight that Ares completely lacked. Their interactions on Olympus reinforced this perception. While Ares might storm and bluster, demanding immediate action, and praising brute strength, Athena would present calm, reasoned arguments, often swaying Zeus to her viewpoint. She was his favored daughter, his intellectual equal, his trusted strategist. Zeus, who himself wielded the ultimate weapon, the thunderbolt, with both raw power and decisive judgment, understood and appreciated Athena's measured approach to conflict more than Ares's chaotic passion. He often rebuked Ares for his indiscriminate love of battle and his whining when wounded, effectively diminishing Ares's status in the Olympian hierarchy. The very king of the gods, the ultimate arbiter of power, implicitly sided with Athena's definition of warfare. The human perception of the two gods also evolved over time. While Ares might have been invoked by those seeking brute force or revenge, Especially in more tribal or savage societies, Athena became the patron of cities, of reasoned governance, of disciplined armies, and of wise leaders. Her temples flourished in the centers of intellectual and political power. Warriors would pray to Athena for cunning and protection, not just strength. This shift in worship, this preference for Athena's intelligent approach to conflict, further cemented her victory in the cosmic debate. Mortals, having experienced both the mindless devastation of Ares and the purposeful victories orchestrated by Athena, increasingly understood that true mastery of war lay not in blind rage, but in enlightened strategy. The climax of their rivalry, therefore, was not a single titanic battle between them, for Athena would never stoop to Ares' level of unthinking aggression, and Ares could never truly defeat Athena's intellect. Instead, the climax was the unfolding of human civilization itself influenced by their opposing forces. It was the moment when mankind, having been given the tools of both brute strength and strategic thought, increasingly chose the path of Athena. It was the enduring victory of cunning over chaos, discipline over frenzy, purpose over pure destruction. The strategic mind of Athena proved superior to the savage passion of Ares, not just in individual battles, but in the shaping of entire societies and the very nature of conflict through the ages. The legacy of Athena and Ares, therefore, is a profound and lasting one. Ares remains the primal, terrifying force of war, a constant reminder of the destructive power that lies within human nature, the urge for violence, the thrill of the fight. He represents the ever-present danger of war, descending into senseless brutality. But Athena, the goddess born from the very mind of Zeus, stands as the enduring symbol of intelligent conflict of war, waged with a purpose, with strategy, with an ultimate aim of victory that leads to order, not perpetual chaos. She reminds us that true strength lies not just in wielding a sword, but in mastering the mind. In the end, the question, who is the real god of war, finds its answer not in the loudest roar or the bloodiest field, but in the lasting impact on civilization, in the lessons learned, and in the enduring preference for strategy over savagery. Athena's wisdom, her measured approach, her constructive influence, ultimately outshone Ares's destructive passion. The shining spear of Athena, guided by intellect, proved more formidable than the blood-stained blade of Ares driven by rage. Her victory was not one of conquest but of definition, and so the wisdom of Athena continues to guide those who seek to understand, to control, and perhaps one day to transcend the grim necessity of conflict itself, forever illuminating the true path to victory, a victory not just of arms but of the mind. The echoes of their divine struggle continue to resonate, a timeless reminder that even in the chaos of battle, intellect and purpose can reign supreme, forever solidifying Athena's place as the true ultimate master of war.